Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. Late 1944. The war in Europe grinds on, a monstrous machine consuming lives and landscapes. While the world's attention is fixed on the Western Front and the desperate fighting in the Ardennes, another brutal, attritional campaign is being waged in the unforgiving mountains of Italy. Here, along the formidable Gothic Line, the Allied advance has slowed to a bloody crawl. This was no swift liberation. It was a vertical war, fought uphill against a determined and well-entrenched enemy. The terrain itself was a weapon. The Apennine Mountains, a jagged spine running down the Italian peninsula, presented a nightmarish obstacle course of sheer cliffs, deep ravines and narrow, winding roads easily defended. Winter had descended, cloaking the peaks in snow and shrouding the valleys in a perpetual, freezing mist. Rain turned the earth into a quagmire of clinging mud that swallowed boots, bogged down vehicles, and made every movement an exhausting struggle. For the soldiers of the U.S. Fifth Army, it was a cold, miserable existence, a world away from the sunny Italy of postcards. They faced elements of the German 14th Army, battle-hardened veterans skilled in mountain warfare, who had transformed every ridge and village into a fortress. Concrete bunkers, machine gun nests known as pillboxes, and vast minefields were woven into the landscape, creating a nearly impenetrable defensive belt. Every inch of ground gained was paid for in blood. This was a war of artillery and attrition, where the roar of big guns echoed endlessly through the valleys, and survival often depended on finding cover from the relentless shelling. It is in this grim, frozen landscape, a forgotten front in the grand strategy of the war, that our story unfolds. A story of unimaginable pressure, profound courage, and the ultimate sacrifice. Fighting in this brutal theater was the 92nd Infantry Division, an all-African American segregated unit known as the Buffalo Soldiers. This historic nickname, first earned by black cavalry regiments on the American frontier in the 19th century, was a badge of honor, symbolizing resilience and fighting spirit. Yet in the World War of 1944, these men fought a two-front war, one against the German army and another against the pervasive racism within their own. Led predominantly by white officers, many of whom harbored deep-seated prejudices and doubted the combat effectiveness of their men. The 92nd was often given the most difficult assignments with inadequate support. They were scrutinized, their every action judged by a different, harsher standard. Despite this, the men of the 92nd served with dedication, determined to prove their patriotism and their worth on the battlefield. Among them was a 29-year-old officer from Cincinnati, Ohio, First Lieutenant John Robert Fox. A graduate of Wilberforce University, Fox was intelligent, calm under pressure, and deeply committed to his duty and the men he served with. He was a forward artillery observer, a member of the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, attached to the 366th Infantry Regiment. His job was one of the most dangerous on the battlefield, requiring him to operate far ahead of the main lines, often alone or with a small team, to be the eyes of the artillery batteries positioned miles to the rear. In a segregated army fighting for freedoms they themselves were denied at home, men like John Fox carried a heavy burden. They fought not just for victory over fascism, but for their own dignity, for the right to be seen as equals, as Americans. Their performance in the unforgiving Italian mountains would be a testament to their character, a story of valor that would take decades to be fully and deservedly recognized. The forward observer was the unseen linchpin of the battlefield, a force multiplier whose skill could turn the tide of an engagement. In the rugged terrain of Italy, where line of sight was constantly obstructed by hills and forests, their role was more critical than ever. An infantry platoon could be pinned down by a single, well-placed enemy machine gun, its advance completely halted. But the forward observer could unleash hell. He was the vital link connecting the frontline soldier to the devastating power of American field artillery. Carrying a heavy backpack radio, the iconic SC-RMS 300 walkie-talkie, Lieutenant Fox's job was to infiltrate forward positions, identify enemy strongpoints, and communicate precise coordinates back to the Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This was a delicate and deadly art. A mistake of a few degrees in an azimuth reading or a slight miscalculation of range could bring friendly fire down on his own troops. The process was a methodical, high-stakes conversation conducted in a specialized language of grid coordinates, shell types, and fire commands, all crackling over the airwaves amidst the chaos of battle. A typical call might be something like, "Victor 5, this is Dog 7. Fire mission over." He would then relay the target's location, perhaps a German mortar pit or a concentration of enemy infantry. Miles away, the gun crews of the 598th Field Artillery Battalion would swing their massive 105 M2A howitzers into position. With terrifying speed and precision, they would load a high-explosive shell, adjust the gun's elevation and traverse, and await the command to fire. The observer would then call for adjustments. Add 50, right 100, walking the shells onto the target until he could report fire for effect. At that command, the entire battery would unleash a synchronized volley, erasing the target from the map. This was the symphony of destruction that John Fox conducted, a lonely and vulnerable musician playing an instrument of immense power from a dangerously exposed stage. As Christmas of 1944 approached, a deceptive quiet settled over the Serchio River Valley sector of the Gothic Line. The Allies, believing the exhausted German forces were content to hold their defensive positions for the winter, relaxed their guard. But the German High Command had one last offensive planned for the Italian front. Codenamed Unternehmen Wintergewitter, or Operation Winter Storm, it was a bold and ambitious counterattack designed to coincide with the Battle of the Bulge further north. The objectives were to smash through the American lines held by the 92nd Division, drive a wedge between the British and American armies, and recapture the strategic port of Livorno. The German 14th Army, under General Kurt von Tippelskirch, amassed a potent force, including elite mountain troops from the Austrian 4th, Kitzbühel-Jeberg's division, and Italian fascist soldiers from the Monte Rosa and Italia divisions. These were experienced soldiers, acclimatized to the harsh conditions and experts in mountain warfare. The plan was to strike on December 26th, the day after Christmas, exploiting the holiday lull and using the cover of a brewing winter storm to achieve maximum surprise. The Germans knew the American sector, particularly that held by the untested Buffalo soldiers, was the weakest point in the line. They intended to hit it with overwhelming force, creating panic and collapse. The weight of this surprise assault would fall squarely on a handful of small, isolated outposts scattered along the front, defended by a thin screen of American GIs and Italian partisans. One of those outposts, a tiny, ancient village perched precariously on a hilltop, was named Sommocolonia. It was about to become the focal point of the entire German offensive, and the final destination for First Lieutenant John R. Vox. Sommocolonia was a speck on the map, a medieval hamlet of stone houses and narrow, cobblestone alleys clinging to a steep hillside. In peacetime, it was a quiet, picturesque village. In December 1944, it was a critical piece of military real estate. Its elevation offered a commanding view of the surrounding Serchio Valley, making it an ideal observation post for directing artillery fire. Whoever held Sommocolonia could see for miles, controlling the key roads and approaches below. The defense of this vital position was entrusted to a small, mixed force, a platoon from the 92nd Division's 366th Infantry Regiment, along with a handful of Italian partisans, were the village's only guardians. It was a skeletal defense for such a strategic location. First Lieutenant John Fox was with them, having established his observation post, or OP, in the second story of a sturdy stone house near the center of the village. From its windows, he had a panoramic view of the likely enemy attack routes. The day after Christmas dawned cold and bleak. A thick fog blanketed the valley, and a biting wind whipped snow through the narrow streets. The atmosphere was tense. The defenders, shivering in their foxholes and makeshift barricades, peered into the swirling gray mist, a sense of unease growing with each passing hour. They were isolated, outnumbered, and acutely aware of their vulnerability. The German assault, when it came, would be a swift and brutal affair. For Fox, the mission was clear. Hold this position. Use the power of his artillery to break up any enemy attack, and report on enemy movements. He checked his SC-300 radio, confirmed his communication link with the artillery batteries miles away, and settled in for the wait. He and the small garrison of Sommocolonia were the tripwire, the first line of defense against the fury of Operation Winter Storm. The German attack began before dawn, a sudden eruption of violence that shattered the winter silence. An intense artillery and mortar barrage slammed into Sommocolonia, the explosions echoing like monstrous thunder through the mountains. Stone walls crumbled and shrapnel tore through the air. Under the cover of this deafening bombardment and the thick fog, waves of German and Italian mountain troops, cloaked in white winter camouflage, surged up the slopes toward the village. The American and partisan defenders were hit from multiple directions at once, their small outposts quickly overwhelmed. The fighting devolved into a chaotic, close-quarters struggle in the labyrinthine streets. The crack of rifles, the chatter of machine guns, and the guttural shouts of the attackers filled the air. From his second-story window, John Fox saw the ghostly figures of the enemy emerging from the mist, swarming into the village. His moment had come. With ice-cold professionalism, he keyed the microphone of his radio. His voice, calm and steady, cut through the static, reporting the enemy's positions. Miles away, the gun crews of the 598th Field Artillery leapt into action. The first shells screamed overhead and crashed down on the German staging areas outside the village, sowing confusion and death among the attackers. Fox worked with grim efficiency, observing the shell impacts and calling in adjustments. He was a master of his craft, orchestrating a curtain of high explosives that slowed the enemy advance. But the sheer number of attackers was overwhelming. They pressed forward relentlessly, ignoring their losses, infiltrating the village from all sides. The fighting became a desperate house-to-house battle. The small garrison was being systematically eliminated, their positions overrun one by one. The thin line of defense was breaking, and the enemy was closing in. As German soldiers flooded the narrow streets below, Lieutenant Fox became a one-man fortress. The house he occupied was now the last significant point of organized resistance in the village center. While the remaining GIs fought and fell in the surrounding buildings, Fox continued his vital work, his voice a calm and deadly presence on the artillery net. He knew that with every successful fire mission, he was buying precious minutes for his comrades to attempt a withdrawal. His calls became more urgent, the coordinates he transmitted drawing ever closer to his own position. He was walking the barrage in, a terrifyingly dangerous tactic where an observer directs artillery fire step by step towards their own location to break up a close-range assault. First, he called for fire on the outskirts, then the main road leading into the square. Each time, the ground shook as shells from the 105 howitzers landed with devastating effect. But the enemy kept coming. Through his window, he could now clearly see the details of their uniforms, the weapons they carried, the determined expressions on their faces. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The sound of German machine pistols and exploding grenades grew louder, closer. Bullets began to thud into the stone walls of his makeshift command post. He knew he was surrounded and completely cut off. The static on his radio crackled, the fire direction center asking for a situation report. Fox reported his position as being overrun. He continued to call for fire, asking for the next barrage to land just 60 yards from his window. The radio operator at the FDC, miles away in the relative safety of the rear, must have felt a cold dread. He knew what such a request meant. The danger zone for a 105 Michelle was far greater than 60 yards. Fox was now directing the storm of steel into his own immediate vicinity, a desperate gamble to halt the unstoppable tide. The battle for Sommocolonia reached its terrifying crescendo. German soldiers were no longer just outside the village, they were at his door. Fox could hear them on the first floor of the house, their boots clattering on the stone, their voices shouting commands in German. They were clearing the building, working their way upwards. His time was measured in seconds. Glancing out the window, he saw the village square was now thick with enemy troops, consolidating their position, preparing to press the attack beyond the village. There were dozens, perhaps more than 100, moving with the confidence of victors. For any other man, this would have been the moment of surrender or a final, futile firefight with his service pistol. But John Fox was a forward observer. His greatest weapon wasn't in his hands. It was miles away, waiting for his command. He knew what he had to do. The remaining American soldiers and the Italian civilians who had not yet fled needed more time to escape. The only way to buy that time was to decapitate the German assault, to hit them right at their point of concentration. With the enemy about to burst through his door, he picked up his radio handset one last time. He requested a fire mission, giving the coordinates for the center of the village. His own coordinates. The voice that came back over the radio was hesitant, incredulous. The battery officer warned him, stating the obvious. That barrage would come down directly on top of him. The shells would obliterate his position. John Fox's response was not born of panic or despair, but of a clear, cold, and heroic calculation. He knew his life was forfeit. He chose to trade it for the lives of others and the success of the mission. His final transmission would become legendary, a testament to the highest ideals of military service. The airwaves crackled with the most chilling request an artilleryman can ever receive. Lieutenant Fox confirmed the coordinates were correct. The FDC officer repeated his warning, his voice strained, telling Fox that he was calling fire directly upon himself. The choice was now his. In that final, fleeting moment, with the sounds of the enemy closing in, John R. Fox uttered the words that would immortalize him. There was no hesitation, no fear in his voice, only resolve. He radioed back, "Fire it." He then added the grim, selfless logic behind his decision. "There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." That was his last transmission. Miles away, the men of the 598th Field Artillery Battalion had their orders. With heavy hearts, they followed the final command of their forward observer. The lanyards were pulled, and the big guns roared in unison. A salvo of high-explosive shells, 75 men 105, arced through the winter sky on a precise, calculated trajectory. Their destination the very heart of Sommocolonia. For a moment there was only the high-pitched whistle of their descent. Then the world erupted. The center of the village vanished in a series of titanic explosions. The house Fox was in, along with the surrounding buildings, was pulverized into dust and rubble. The German forces, massed in the square and preparing for their next push, were caught in the open, at the epicenter of a man-made volcano. The barrage was devastatingly effective. When the smoke cleared, the German attack was broken. An estimated 100 enemy soldiers were killed in that single, catastrophic moment. The disciplined German advance dissolved into chaos and confusion. The sacrifice of John R. Fox had worked. He had traded his life to stall the enemy, giving his fellow soldiers and hundreds of Italian civilians the critical time they needed to escape the German onslaught and regroup. He had held the line. The sacrifice of Lieutenant Fox did not win the battle for Sommocolonia. The village was ultimately captured by the Germans, but his action had a profound tactical impact. The decapitation of the lead German elements caused significant disruption and delay to the entire Operation Winter Storm timetable. The momentum of the German offensive was blunted at a critical moment. This pause, bought at the highest possible price, allowed the scattered American forces of the 92nd Division to establish a new defensive line further back. The German advance eventually petered out, failing to achieve its ambitious objectives. Sommocolonia was retaken by American forces just a few days later, on January 1st, 1945. It was then that search parties made their way through the ruins. In the rubble of the house from which he had made his final stand, they found the body of First Lieutenant John R. Fox. He was surrounded by the bodies of nearly 100 German soldiers. He was not alone. His courage had brought the enemy down with him. Initially, Fox's incredible act of self-sacrifice went largely unrecognized. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star, a significant honor for gallantry, but one that many of his comrades felt fell short of what his actions deserved. In the racially stratified U.S. Army of the 1940s, it was exceedingly rare for an African-American soldier to be recommended for, let alone receive, the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. No black soldier received the medal during World War II itself. For decades, the story of John Fox's final moments was kept alive by the men who served with him and by his family, who fought tirelessly to see his heroism properly acknowledged by a nation he had given everything to defend. It would be a long, arduous journey through military archives and bureaucratic resistance. The road to proper recognition was long and fraught with obstacles. For nearly 4 decades, the story of John Fox remained a footnote in the history of the Italian campaign, a glaring omission in the annals of American heroism. But the memory of his sacrifice never faded for those who knew the truth. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a renewed push by historians and fellow veterans to re-examine the records of African American soldiers from World War II gained momentum. Fox's case was a centerpiece of this effort. In 1982, after a review of the evidence, the Army upgraded his Silver Star to the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. While a significant step, his supporters continued to argue that his actions on December 26, 1944, met the criteria for the highest honor. The final breakthrough came in the 1990s, when a U.S. Army Commission study concluded that racial discrimination had been a significant factor in the failure to award the Medal of Honor to deserving African American soldiers during the war. On January 13, 1997, more than 52 years after his death in Sommocolonia, justice was finally rendered. In a solemn ceremony at the White House, President Bill Clinton posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor to First Lieutenant John R. Fox and 6 other African American heroes of World War II. Fox's widow, Arlene, accepted the medal on his behalf. Today, John R. Fox's legacy endures as one of the most powerful examples of courage and selfless sacrifice in military history. His story transcends the battlefield. It is a poignant reminder of the double battle fought by the Buffalo Soldiers and other minority service members, a fight for freedom abroad and for dignity and equality at home. His final, defiant radio call, "Fire it," echoes through history, a testament to a man who, in the face of certain death, chose his duty, his comrades, and his country over his own life. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.